I'm Rachel Finnie, and I am the Product Implementation and Training Consultant for ELT with McGraw Hill. Personally, to introduce myself, I've been around in the ELT space for about 30 years now, and I've done most of the things you can do in terms of English language teaching and publishing. So I've been an editor, commissioning editor, I have developed content, I have been a publisher, and I've also written ELT books in the past as well. So as you can imagine, I've seen a lot of changes over those 30 years. And I've watched as English language teaching practice has changed to fit in with the trends that are taking place around us. So most particularly, I've been very interested in the 21st century skills development that's taken place in the last 20 years or so. But right now, I'm seeing considerable change that takes 21st century skills even further. I'm seeing even greater demands on our students in terms of the need for them to be prepared for employability, for us as teachers to help them to gain the soft skills that they need so that they will be employable once they finish their education. But I'm also seeing some things that I find specifically challenging for our students in the last few years and for us teachers, because they're things that we need to take into account in our teaching practice. And really, the things that I'm talking about today focus on three of those things. And I want to look with you at the challenges that those things present for our students and also some of the strategies that we as teachers can employ to try and support our students, if you like. So let's start with the challenges for students. And in that respect, there are three things that I'm going to look at. Attention span, because there are some significant changes around attention span at the moment. Also social media and the impact that's having, the quite significant impact that is having on society actually in general and on our students in particular, and the way that impacts them. And also well-being. Student well-being is for me becoming more and more important actually in the current societal cultural climate that we live in. All those things are interrelated. They all kind of have a knock-on effect for each other. But anyway, I'm going to treat them separately despite the interrelationship between them. And first of all, I want to focus on attention. And that first statement, attention is the fuel for our ability to think. For me, that's crucial, because if we can't be sure that our students are focused and attentive in our lessons or our lectures, then the concern is that they're not getting the best out of that lesson, we're not delivering the best teaching experience to them, and ultimately they're not going to achieve their potential. So it's a crucial thing that we understand what's happening these days with attention span. Now, I say in the notes that there isn't very much historical research on this. There's not an awful lot to look over a long term, but there's a lot of research recently that indicates that there is a problem and that this problem particularly affects our young people. It's true to say that the issue does depend slightly on the task in hand and that young people will be more attentive on certain things than others, but there is no evidence to support the fact that lessons and lectures are at the top of the pile, I'm afraid. Also, one of the problems around attention span is that there are non-stop demands for our attention at the moment, and that means that there are lots of things that can distract us and can distract our students from what we should be focusing on. And of course, you won't be surprised to see that cell phones is one of those critical things. And that we know categorically that the use of cell phones and sometimes even the possession of cell phones in class worsens learning and memorizing. So there are some real concerns here, and we need to be thinking what we can do about some of these things. Now, there are some figures that I wanted to share with you, simply because they give us an indication of the size of the problem, if you like. Now, 37, the first figure, and I only learnt this from some research I read about quite recently. This figure relates to the fact that in a 60-minute period, huge numbers of people, the majority of people, are interrupted as many as 37 times by their smartphone. So that may be notifications. It might be the fact that people want to check emails. It might be that their phone's on silent, but it vibrates and that interrupts them and distracts them from what they're supposed to be focusing on. It might simply be younger people checking their phones to see if their latest post has gained any more likes or something. But it's a significant figure, and it's something we should be worried about. Worse than that is the next figure and what that represents. So if we have an interruption, be it from our smartphone or be it from something else, but if something interrupts our attention and takes our focus away from what we're addressing, what we're concentrating on, it can take 22 minutes to regain the level of focus that we had. So, I mean, the basic message under that is that smartphones are actually making us stupid. They're not making us smart at all. They interrupt us on a frequent basis. They damage our attention span, and they have the potential to damage even our intelligence and our effectiveness. So this is not a good scenario. Now, in terms of the 2.5, this relates to the fact that in 2004, as I say, we haven't got a lot of historical research, but 20 or so years ago, nearly 20 years ago, we measured the average attention span in terms of looking at a screen and reading a screen and gaining information from a screen. So this is relevant to online learning and so forth. And the average attention span then was 2.5 minutes. Now, the next figure is between 2004 and now. Sometime there was another piece of research that showed that attention span had already dropped to 75 seconds. That's 1 minute 15 seconds. The last figure there, 47, is what our attention span when engaged with a screen is believed to be now, 47 seconds, less than a minute. Now, okay, this relates to scrolling patterns when we're on the internet and to engagement with social media as well. But it does have an effect for our students learning online. If they're studying autonomously and we've given them some assignments to do, and those assignments are online, then there is definitely going to be an impact from the fact that their attention span will diminish, and it will diminish quite quickly. So we need to keep that in mind, because this attention span shrinkage is going to have an effect on learning and on the efficacy of learning. Another thing to say about attention is that we tend to say that multitasking is a good thing. In fact, some people pride themselves on their ability to multitask, and they think that they can accomplish a lot. Actually, the opposite is the case. It's not true that if we multitask, we do better. In fact, it's almost the opposite. We know that you can't, for example, read an email and be in a video meeting at the same time. And the research shows that what happens is we think we can do both at the same time, but our attention is quickly going from one to the other. We're switching attention very fast from one of those jobs or tasks to the other. And that not only causes stress, but it means that focus and engagement on both those tasks diminish. So that, again, in terms of attention, is a relevant piece of information for our students in terms of how they should organize their study time, if they're studying independently or if they're revising or whatever, and how we as teachers should guide their focus, if you like. Another thing about attention span, which is a bit demoralizing for us as teachers, is the fact that we know, again, from research, that attention span generally is only about 10 to 15 minutes long. So that's a bonus compared to some of those, the small figures that we've just seen. But if you're in a situation, for example, a lesson or a lecture, where you're needing to focus, the average time where that is maintained is 10 to 15 minutes. Now, sadly, we know that most of our lessons and lectures are 30 minutes, 45 minutes, or even 60 minutes long. We absolutely have to factor this information into our lesson delivery, or we're going to maybe do our students a disservice, because we're going to deliver key information at the wrong point in the lesson, if you like. So there is something about delivering some of the key information within that time slot of the first 15 minutes. But that's not to say that the rest, the other 15 or 30 minutes or whatever of the lesson isn't going to have any significance. Of course it is, but we need strategies during the rest of that time so that we can pull the attention span and the concentration and the focus back to the main points of the lesson. And we'll touch on some of those later. Okay. Now, those are the key things I want to say at this point about attention span. The other thing to say is that we should, to remind us about really, is that we shouldn't ever, it's the main message, I think, we shouldn't ever try to focus on more than one thing at once. That means don't have distractions in the background, don't have music on while you're studying, don't try and read your phone while you're in a lecture or a lesson, don't try and respond to your phone at all. We ourselves and our students can make those efforts to try to focus and avoid the distractions. Okay then, so in terms of social media, those are the points I wanted to make about the multitasking and the lessons. In terms of social media, it's almost a misnomer to call it social media these days in some respects. There are good things about social media, of course there are. And it can have a positive impact on learning, and it can be useful in terms of education. And for some people who might be isolated or whatever, it can give good channels of communication. But there are some bad things as well. And for many people, social media is taking them away from that social support, away from a social network that involves personal contact and face-to-face interaction. Now, again, the research tells us that teenagers believe they can juggle 6 to 7 forms of social media at the same time. We know they can't really think about more than one thing at a time, or there are going to be problems. So what happens is those teenagers encounter something called the switch cost effect. This means that they make more errors, they remember less, and they become much less creative. So again, that can have an impact on how they learn and how we should deliver educational contact to them. And also the discussions that we should have with them about their use of social media. I mean, I think there's a place for that in our lessons as well, in maybe some of the downtime in our lessons. Hewlett-Packard, the printer and so forth company, they did a study on this, and some of their staff were asked to work without any interruption whatsoever. And another group of the staff who were studied worked with the interruptions of having to deal with emails and phone calls whilst carrying out their required work allocation. What actually happened is that the second group, who worked with interruptions, when they were tested at the end of the experiment, had lost 10 IQ points. That's how significant it is. That actually become less intelligent. And again, these are messages that we need to keep in mind because of the impact this social media world is having on our students and their abilities to process, their abilities to gain knowledge and keep knowledge and so forth. So it's not a terribly happy picture, I have to say. As I say, there are good things about social media. Social media means that our students can be more tech savvy. They're obviously more globally informed because social media goes around the world in a second, news travels, and everybody knows everything if they follow social media closely. And that maintenance of contact and the educational aspects of social media, those are significant, as well as the fun element, of course. But the things that put pressure on our students are things like FOMO, the fear of missing out, hence the need for them constantly to want to check their phone, hence the distractions that take away from their focus that we talked about when we talked about attention. Also, this pressure to be popular, to put things up, to have views, to have likes, to have people clicking on heart for their mini videos and everything else. That becomes, for some of the young people these days, that becomes like everything. It becomes critical and so important to them that it detracts from everything else and is a very bad and unconstructive influence, if you like. There's also, of course, the elements of invasion of privacy on social media, and the whole cyberbullying and cancel culture have become quite distasteful in some respects, and we need to be aware of those pressures and what they can do to our students, because there's no indication at the moment that this is going to become significantly better, and there's every likelihood that it may become worse. And the effects of all that in terms of the anxiety that can be caused, the pressures our students feel, and the damage that this does to their attention spans and everything else, those are all really significant things. So as I say, it is something that is kind of anti-social media. Now, in terms of well-being, there are some facts here that I find quite alarming. For me, well-being is really a really significant feature of our student groups. And I know we're not counsellors, I know we're there to teach and to educate, but I firmly believe we need to treat our students as individuals. We need to take a holistic approach to their education. And it does behove us to some extent to care about their well-being and to do what we can to nurture that and to support that. And also to give our students strategy to support their own well-being, to have an awareness and to know what they can do personally if they find themselves in difficulty. These facts, these figures are really rather distressing. I mean, nearly 1 in 3 of all 13 to 18-year-olds will experience an anxiety disorder. And I'm certainly finding that I hear about this more and more in my contact with younger people, that they're experiencing a feeling of pressure, a feeling of anxiety, almost leading to depression as well. And the figures increased by 20% in 5 years, between 2007 and 2012. Even more worrying is the fact that the rate of hospital admissions for seriously depressed teenagers has doubled in the past 10 years. Now, I'm not entirely blaming social media. There are lots of factors around in society and in our cultures these days that are quite difficult for our teenagers to handle. I've mentioned that the pressure and high expectations upon our teenagers to succeed, but also the whole thing about that global exchange of news and the fact that every alarming piece of information in any country around the world is shared instantly. That gives an impression, maybe more these days than ever, that the world can be quite a scary and threatening place with terrorist attacks and with natural disasters and so on and so forth. But social media is in there. Social media is certainly a factor that we can't ignore when it comes to well-being. So as I say, we should be talking about a holistic approach in terms of the way we deal with our students. Well-being impacts everything, and it's going to add to the problems that our students may have in terms of their attention spans and maintaining focus and maintaining concentration. It's going to add to and be created by, there's a symbiotic relationship really between well-being and social media usage and the impact of social media. If our students' well-being is good, they will have self-esteem, they will have self-respect, they will feel more confident, their levels of motivation will be higher. So it's a good investment for us as teachers to try to support, say, and nurture our students' well-being. The outcome can only be good. Students whose well-being is in a good place, who are feeling more confident, then obviously their thinking skills, their communication, their problem skills are all going to be enhanced. So that's got to be a plus as far as we're concerned. All right, so I painted a bit of a bleak picture in a way, I guess, in terms of these worrying factors surrounding our students today. But I genuinely believe that we need to be aware of them, and there are some things that we can do to try to support our students. And with that awareness that we have, try to make sure that our students get the best they can out of us and the best they can from the education that we're providing. So let's move on and look at some of the strategies for teachers. I've started this in terms of well-being, because I wanted to look at that as a holistic thing, given the fact that that seems to be such a fundamental consideration. We can, as teachers, we have close contact with our students, we see them on a regular basis, and we know them reasonably well. So I think we are well placed to be aware of how they're feeling, to be aware of how they seem, and to notice any mood changes. If they suddenly seem to be different, to become introverted, to look troubled, to be quieter than normal, then we're in a position where we can maybe have a chat to them and see if there's anything wrong and pick up on some potential problem areas. And another thing about us as teachers and people who our students hopefully can come to trust is that I do believe we should be available. And we should maybe have regular times, if it's possible, if it's feasible in your institutions, regular times when students come and see us on a one-to-one basis if they wish to do so, or they can book a slot or whatever, but they know that they can do that, and they can do that in confidence, and that we will be there. There is a thing for me about acknowledging some of this information. When there's some activities in class or a lesson that's relevant, I believe it's very useful if we can acknowledge the problems that our students are facing these days. I believe it's very useful if we can adapt lesson formats sometimes to incorporate things like this, so that students know that we know that they could well be having difficulties, they could well be struggling, and there's nothing wrong with that, there's nothing bad about that, and there are strategies that can be found to help deal with that. So I think there's a whole thing there about awareness and about incorporating considerations in our lessons sometimes. And the other thing I think in terms of well-being is that we can create opportunities for pulse checks. We can have, like, now and again, we could say, okay, I'm going to be in my office for the next couple of hours or whatever, and if anybody wants to come in with any problems at all, feel free to do so. We can have a chat in confidence, and maybe I can suggest something that might be useful for you. So the whole thing about well-being for me is an awareness that we have as teachers, so we don't miss something when a student is struggling, awareness and availability. And those two things will go a long way. Okay, but in terms of the more constructive strategies, given the information that I've shared, and given the fact we need to consider that in our delivery of knowledge, these are some of the things that I would propose. We definitely need to be clear about learning outcomes. And we need to be clear when we've focused during a lesson on a particular learning outcome. Now, that might be in that magic 10 to 15 minutes at the beginning of a lesson or a lecture, or it might not. And if it's not, then some of the strategies below also give the opportunity for that to happen and to be more successful. But if you have an intense lecture or lesson and you as a teacher are delivering that at the same pace and the same rate all the way through the 45-minute period or whatever, the chances are some of the elements of that lesson that you thought were key will be missed by your students. So clarity about learning outcomes and lesson outcomes, and also clarity around when you're delivering those. What are the key points of focus in the students for the lesson? Let them know, because even that might be enough to bring their concentration and their focus back, even if it's only temporary. Utilize that lovely golden period at the beginning of lessons, that lovely 10 to 15 minutes where their concentration is likely to be at an optimum. Utilize that period because you can be more sure and more confident that your messages will be received and understood at that stage. So if there are some significant things to say or some really impactful points that you want to make, it's a useful strategy to make them in that period. Even if you reiterate them again later on or go on to expand on them, at least set them out in that period. Another thing that we know about lessons, if it's all at the same pace, if it's a lecture format and it is a discussion, or you're presenting information and research and it's all at the same pace with no breakups, no involvement of the students, no change of activity or focus or approach, that is more likely to lose attention from the students more quickly. So it's likely to be less effective. So going on to the next point, it's to our benefit if we can vary the activities. I mean, this is one of the reasons why English language teaching books, for example, are written with a variety of actions, activities and approaches in each lesson, because that variety and that variation can sometimes serve to bring back the attention span, that change of focus. It's almost like, oh, you start again with your period of 10 to 15 minutes, if you like. So vary the activity, or have a little break, or have a breakout for discussion, something that just changes the pace and refocuses the group. We do know that video is good. It definitely appeals to students. It's a medium that they're familiar with, and it's useful to use it in lessons, and it has value, and it can improve, it can get a good concentration factor, it can get engagement. However, bear in mind that a lot of the videos that our students watch are under 3 minutes long, and attention span for videos isn't brilliant either. So keep that in mind, but it is useful to use videos or other media in lessons, and some of that screen time is what our students are most familiar with, so they engage. Another thing that you can do in lessons is to do something unexpected. Lessons can become a little bit predictable sometimes. There's no hidden surprises. Students know we're going to do grammar, we're going to do this, we're going to have to make notes, we're going to have to do some exercises or whatever. Do the unexpected, change it, do something unpredictable, whatever that may be, because that again will kind of shock the students out of their disengagement, and they might be thinking, oh, okay, this is interesting, and you'll pull them back a little bit, you'll hook them back in, you'll improve their level of attention again by doing the unexpected. I mean, I'm not going to suggest what that might be, it depends how your lessons go, but anything that is out of the ordinary and not what your students might expect can be useful. Absolutely avoid multitasking. It doesn't really pay off. We've talked about how people generally can only focus at one thing at a time, and how it's like the law of diminishing returns if they try to do several things at the same time, because none of them will be done as effectively as they could have been done were they the only thing that was focused on. So avoid multitasking where possible. And also in our lessons, if we incorporate peer teaching, that also will engage our students and it will grab their attention. If they are involved in the actual teaching, whether it's in pairs in a group or in the entire class, There's no reason why it can't be. If they're really involved at that level, they have more reasons to concentrate. They have more motivation to focus. And it's far more likely that you will keep their attention and you'll keep it for longer. So that's all I want to say to you. I hope you found some of that useful. These are things that I think are really, really important. I think we must take them into account. I don't think we can pretend that they don't matter, they're not relevant. They are relevant, and these things may become, hopefully not, but they may become worse before they get better. So I do think we as students, we as teachers need to think about them and need to think of some of the strategies that we can do, both to support our students and to kind of support that whole issue around attention span. I would love to hear from any of you. If you've got views, please share them with me. These are my contact details here. I'd be very happy to debate everything that I've talked about. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you.